Silence. Hi, Paul. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely our pleasure. So I'm going to go straight into it. The question we always ask to start off with: what is socialism to you?
Thank you, Paul. It's socialism for me. Well, I lend my beliefs to that of Tony Benn's definition of socialism. That's all about need before profit. I mean, it's a basic necessity of life. It's a fact that we need food, we need clothes, we need to be healthy, we need a roof over our head, we need to work, we need education, we need to be treated as humanely as possible and equally as well, regardless of our sex, our gender, our creed or race. And we need to be able to earn a good wage as well to support ourselves and our families. All this is a necessity. But however, the current system, which is a capitalist-based system, doesn't provide for all of that. And unfortunately, it's a failure of this system because in a lot of cases, uh, none of these that I've just mentioned are even adhered to. So what happens is if it was a successful system, then we wouldn't have children starving, we wouldn't have food banks, wouldn't have clothes banks, we wouldn't have a health service, which is increasingly being privatized, which ends up resorting to making decisions about who to save, and that's all based on financial choice. We wouldn't have homeless people, we wouldn't have large numbers of unemployed people, and we wouldn't have a lack of well-paid jobs. So we wouldn't have a severe deficit in education where instead of teaching children, they're being managed into a society where they're going to go on and it's going to be dog eat dog. We wouldn't have racism. We wouldn't have class inequality. We wouldn't have oppression of women. We wouldn't have oppression of minorities based on their gender, based on their sex, religion, or race of culture. So for me, it's all about need before profit. It shouldn't be a dog eat dog world. And that's what socialism is for me. Kinder, gentler politics, which doesn't measure everything by the economic value of it all. That's socialism for me.
Okay, there's so many questions I could ask about that. That was a really nice definition and a really full definition. The first thing I'm going to ask there then is, do you think we've ever had like aspects of socialism in our society, and are we moving away from that, do you think? Because you mentioned food banks and clothing banks, and they're on the rise. So is that because we're moving away from socialism, or is that something else that's causing that?
Well, I was born in 1979, so I was born in the year that Margaret Thatcher came into power. And I can't really say that in my lifetime I have ever experienced any kind of socialism in government, be it locally or be it nationally. I I was born and brought up, and I still live in the town called Walsall in the West Midlands. And I remember in the mid 90s there was a sort of a socialist leadership in the council. It was the left leadership, and they were providing they realized that devolved power works. So the more power is devolved to the communities, the greater they can make use of of actually benefiting from government. So what they did is they started a policy where they set up neighbourhood offices in local areas. So each ward had their own little neighbourhood office, and that would be like a hub where they would go and pay their bills or whatever, and go and get advice on neighbourhood issues and council tax or whatever it was called at that time. And what happened was the government at the time was a Tory government. We're talking the mid 90s, but it was just when Tony Blair was leader. And because this was against everything that that the party stood for at that time, they went down and shut down our local council and suspended and I think expelled all the members because they wouldn't support this kind of system. That was the closest I've come to socialism, as in where it's been devolved to the grassroots, to ordinary people, where they have a say and they're involved in how local government is run. Other than that, I don't think I've experienced socialism. And what I have experienced socialism in is, however, is the response from people, ordinary people like you and me, uh, when government has failed. So food banks, clothes banks, mutual aid groups, local cooperatives, these have been set up in response because the government and the system has failed ordinary people. And that's probably the closest I've come to socialism. But that is ironically because of the failure of the current system itself. So that's my experience. But I wish that there was a government or there was a local government that would actually adhere to socialist values and principles. And there are examples. There's Preston in the north, and you've got Ayrshire in Scotland, and there are models that can promote this, but unfortunately, it's very few and far between.
So, like, would you say that like an important part of socialism is that devolution of power, given power to communities, given power to individual people to support one another locally? Is that something that you would see as fundamental to socialism, or is there a different form where you can do it from the top down?
No, no, no. I don't see any form of socialism from top down. I think it's always from the bottom. It's always to make sure that there's a redistribution, not only of wealth, but a redistribution of power as well. You can't have socialism from the top down. It's always got to be bottoms up. And I don't think it's just devolution of government in itself. It's making sure that people, ordinary people, have more say and more control over their lives. Right now, they don't. They only have more control over their lives if they have a certain amount of money in their pockets. That is the truth. If they don't have a certain amount of money in their pocket, they don't have control over their lives. They're reliant on others and reliant on the system. And we've seen that the system has let them down. That's why we've got an increased amount of people on poor wages. We've got an increased amount of young people suffering. We've got an increased amount of children and kids who are still starving. And that's because their parents don't have enough money in their pocket. They're not getting wages, paid the right amount of wages. And that's not always necessarily because they're out of work. People are in 1, 2, 3 jobs and still can't afford to pay the bills and still can't afford to put food on the table. So it is systematic of how society in itself is really struggling because of the current economic model that we have.
You mentioned work there as well. So, like, where does work fit in with socialism? Because there are a lot of people who think socialists just expect like everyone to have a free ride. That's what I'm often accused of. The idea that I, as a socialist, just want loads of people to get money for nothing. Um, is Where does work fit in with socialism? Do you think?
Work is very important in socialism because another example of socialism would be the organizing of workers and work as well towards a common collective, meaning when you are a socialist or when you pursue socialist policies, you make sure that people in work are treated fairly as well. That means they receive the right wage, they receive the correct job prospects, and uh, they're not seen as being discriminated against because of what they're paid or where they're from or what their position is within their workplace. So again, socialism covers every aspect of life, whether it's work, whether it's community, whether it's your home, whether it's your family, and it's making sure that equality is important. And I think that is for me is one of the main fundamentals of socialism, that equality, and that everybody gets an equal chance and equal opportunity.
So, speaking of like devolution of power, and would you say that devolution of power to workers as well? So, giving workers more power within the workplace, more say within the workplace, and maybe more rewards from from the work they do, would that be a socialist principle to you?
I think yeah, that would definitely be a socialist endeavor, and not just that. I think if you look in a hierarchy within the workplace, any organization that will give workers more say, workers more involvement, will end up being a happier and more prosperous organization to work for as well. Anywhere in a workforce where you've got a top-down, triangulated model where you get instructions only from the top, I'm sure people at the bottom either move on or are unhappy within their jobs. So it's important, I think, and beneficial for any working model within any organization if people at the bottom are happier and get more choice and get more say in what they do. And that is devolution in effect, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it is like so. Basically, a lot of what you've said there is empowering people, isn't it? Empowering communities, empowering workers, and so on. Speaking of earlier on, we mentioned I mentioned, was there anything that you've experienced that socialism within within your lifetime? I suppose this is before you were born, but we all have the NHS. Is the NHS something that you think is socialist?
I think the NHS is socialist. I mean, I think it's important. I think if I could touch into, I haven't been a socialist all my life. I would say I've become a socialist over the last few years. I've always been a anti-imperialist. I've always been an anti-colonialist, and I think inequality has led me to understand more about socialism. I'm the son of immigrants, and my grandparents experienced colonialism and life under the British Empire, having lived through it, and they shared their brutal experiences to me and to our family about what life was like living under an empire system. And that's led to me being an anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist. And my activism was always community based before I got involved in politics back in 2014 when I joined the Labour Party. I used to be a Labour member back in the 90s when I was as a student. And in 97, I was a member. I only left the party in 2001 after 2002 or 2003 after the war in Iraq. That's when I left the party, and I continued my youth activism and everything I feel I've done. Because again, it's about caring for others. It's about making sure that there's less inequality. It's all been a socialist endeavour, but without me knowing that what socialism is and what is socialist. I think I became a socialist over the last 4 or 5 years after Jeremy Corbyn, and Corbynism involved socialism for me. And that's when I realised that every endeavour I've taken in terms of my fight towards inequality has been an endeavour of socialism. So yeah, the NHS in that capacity, the NHS is an institution that provides free healthcare, uh, and it doesn't look at how much you earn, and it doesn't look at where you're from, and it provides equal level of service to everybody, regardless of where you are and where you come from. So, in my opinion, that is a socialist endeavour, 100%.
That's excellent. It was really interesting to hear like about your development there as a socialist. So um so it's a relatively recent thing that you've identified as being socialist. Do you think you've always had socialist values and didn't really have a word for it, or did you change your opinion? Did your opinion change over time?
100%. I think I've always, not just myself, before me, my father was also involved in the community and the wider. My father campaigned with the anti-Nazi League as well, fought racism back in the 80s. My grandfather worked in the mines, and he worked in the foundry as well, and he was also he used to organize with the it was the Indian Workers Association, I think it was called, because back then trade unions apparently wouldn't allow people of color to be members, so they used to organize themselves within the workplace as well. He felt that, well, you might raise your eyebrows. I've heard stories 20, 25 years, not longer than 20, 25 years ago, in places such as Tower Hamlets, where people couldn't join the Labour Party apparently because they used to say the Labour Party's full locally, there's no room for you to be a member now. So back then, I'm talking 30, 40 years ago, my grandfather was organising and working in the foundries and in the mines when he was part of the Indian Workers Association. I would I would agree that's what the situation was. So those were socialist activities as well, but I don't think they would identify themselves as being socialist. I don't think my dad ever spoke of socialism. However, he continued helping the community in terms of advice, housing, and immigration and stuff like that. As somebody from a minority, coming from a minority background, my heritage is Bangladeshi. So my father used to work uh, in jobs that were underpaid, such as he was in the catering industries to waiter in Indian restaurants, and then in the end he ended up owning a couple of Indian restaurants, and that's where our background comes from. But the important thing to realize is that people from underdeveloped communities that were very young at that time, being Bangladeshi, they didn't have the benefit of being able to getting involved in politics. They were forced into being involved with politics. Workplace struggles and organizing was commonplace, but because of the demands of their work and their other social pressures, they didn't have time to engage in politics. Politics and community organizing was seen as a privilege often reserved for those who were educated within the community, or students or graduates or workers in specific sectors. And that really typifies the experience of so many of our BAME communities and people like myself and our backgrounds. And it's really exactly why it's vitally important that we really deliver this radical change in the involvement of BAME people like myself in the labour movement today.
People who are watching this won't have been able to see my reaction there, but I was pretty shocked by some of the things you said there about people of color not being allowed in trade unions or in the Labour Party. That's just
I've heard from people in Tower Hamlets quite recently who have said that 25, 30 years ago, when they wanted to join the Labour Party, Labour Party officials or local branch officials would say, "Oh, the party's full. We haven't got enough membership," so they weren't allowed to join the party.
absolutely absurd and so wrong when you think like, so my background's a trade unionist, and I think like the idea I got involved in anti-racism through my trade union, so it seems so strange that like that was the case back then. But it's interesting as well. I had a conversation with Alan Margim, who is the secretary of the Durham Miners Association, and he spoke about the anti-racism work that they've done and the international solidarity they had with South African miners and everything like that. So I'm sure it wasn't universal, but that problem, what an awful problem for us to
But
have in the
but
labour movement.
but even now, there's overt and covert racism. Even now, when you have constituencies where there are a larger section of BAME members, more often than not, we've had complaints. I mean, I'm on the NEC now, and I hear these complaints from people that more often than not, and I'd really like to look into this and do an audit into really how often this is happening, because the concerns have been that people with constituencies with a higher ethnic minority population are put in special measures or seen as, and they're put in special measures, which it ends up with candidates being imposed and those members not being able to meet regularly in Labour Party meetings, or because members don't always speak English as a first language, they're being seen as, well, why are they members of the Labour Party if they can't even speak English properly, and things like that. So this is really also concerns that people have told us. So there's a famous case, I refer to Tower Hamlets again, when they were apparently in special measures for almost 2 decades. And that community ended up with leaders being not democratically selected, but being actually imposed or being selected by panel, which is in my opinion also the same as imposition as well. So again, it typifies the experience of BAME communities even in this day and age.
I think a lot of the time people like the idea that racism's gone, but if it's alive and well in the Labour Party even now, and the complaints that you're getting in and stuff like that, it does show that we've still got a really long way to go. How do people go about so let's say, for example, in my Labour Party locally, we have no idea about the background of any of our members. There's no audit, there's no way that we can target people and say, would you like to get involved, is there something we can do, and so on. How do you think it's possible to engage better with people from a variety of different backgrounds?
Uh, uh, for recently, because of the NEC campaign, I've been privileged, and to be fair, ironically, because of coronavirus, you're able to be in a lot of places on the same day without having to travel. So in one day, you could be doing Zoom meetings all over the country. So I had the privilege of being able to meet loads of momentum groups and loads of CLPs and constituencies, and I have seen visibly a large uh, absence of non-white members in those meetings. My idea would be any constituency or any group which experiences a lack of BAME members or a lack of certain communities not being represented, to just go out to those communities and say, we're from the Labour Party. Uh, why aren't you a member? Do you want to join the Labour Party? Do you want to join this Labour movement? Do you want to join this trade union? This is what we're offering. We would like to see more people from your community. And I think you would really benefit from involving those people, and those people will also be able to be involved in there. Right now, I think we're just waiting for groups and communities to join out of their own accord, and you're not going to benefit in the long run by doing this, because a lot of people aren't interested in politics the way things are going right now. Communities, all communities, people of all ages are being put off by politics, and they feel that it's only a select few who decide what's happening. Nothing changes. All politicians are the same. All these kind of tropes are being quite prevalent within communities. So it's important, I think, that people within certain groups go out and encourage lesser represented communities to come and take part. I think that would be a good move.
I think that's really interesting. You'd say we should go out and actively recruit people, because if you look at political views, let's say, for example, women are much more likely to be left wing, have left wing views, but there are many fewer women in the Labour Party. I think in our constituency, it's about a third of our members are women. So is this like generally a problem that we're not going out with? Like we're attracting people who think that they should be involved, rather than trying to go and find out people who we think, need to be represented?
I don't think we should go out and recruit people. What we should do is should go out and invite people. So people come in themselves, and then they make the decision whether or not to join. More often than not, they will see that there is no difference between what they're organising in their communities or what the Labour movement is doing itself as well. For example, I mean, I would say one of the reasons I got politicised is because of inequality. I recognise that there are inequalities which are stopping representation from various communities of various people. And like I said, as a Bangladeshi, I realized that we contribute something like 700,000 Bangladeshis in this country. They don't have very few have there are very few councillors outside London, or they don't have parliamentary representation until quite recently. There are 4 women Bangladeshi MPs. Outside there isn't. So outside, all of them live in London. So anybody outside London feel unrepresented in local government or in parliament. And I thought that this is important, that one of the main steps of developing a community is to have more representation, especially in local government. Uh, where I live in Warsaw, my family have been living in Warsaw for over 50 years, but there's never been a Bangladeshi councillor. There's never even been anybody who stood for council before. So these are the objectives which I had 20, 25 years ago when I started becoming politicized, is based on inequality. However, I noticed my own insensitivity towards other liberation strands as well, because I thought it was mainly only Bangladeshis who were being discriminated against. And I started to develop a more broader understanding of challenges faced by other marginalized groups and minorities. And I saw huge gaps that were between my own community and other marginalized communities, such as LGBT plus people, such as disabled people, and other minority ethnic groups. And my insensitivity towards those issues started to diminish after, although I'd never been ignorant in any way, I'd definitely been insensitive to various societal issues in the past concerning these different liberation groups. So as a result of this learning process, I think I've developed better. My political journey has made me understand that it's actually not just as black and white as it's being racism, or it's being because you're from a certain group. It's actually this whole system itself presents barriers to people who are not within the current status quo. And the current status quo and the current patriarchy is white male patriarchy. It's not female, as you say. There's a lack of female representation. So what we do need is we need to address all these inequalities in society and diminish the patriarchy.
Do you also think there's like a sort of link there between people, I don't know, who a lot of our representatives are people who've always worn a suit to work, for example. We are getting far too few people coming forward in my area who would be considered to be like manual workers, or the traditional working class work. Like, I don't know anyone in my local Labour Party who, for example, is a cleaner. Like, so these are the voices that every single voice in the country should be heard in some way. And I think a lot of the time people aren't recognizing themselves in their political representation. Do you think that is part of it as well, that like certain groups of people are much more likely to be working class? Do you think that could be playing a part as well?
Definitely. One of the main reasons why people that you've just mentioned, so people who would be a cleaner or will be mean manual labor, are usually right now underpaid workers. They're at the bottom of the pay scale more often than not, and for them to be involved in politics is going to be it's going to be a luxury for them, because uh, they don't have the means to be involved in politics. They've either got to go to work, or they've got to look after their family. And it's the same to you before 30, 40 years, when people had they didn't have the luxury of getting involved in politics, so they would think politics isn't for us. Once we're established, and we don't have to worry about money, and we don't have to worry about work, maybe that's when I'll get involved in politics. However, that is exactly the wrong time. What you need to be doing is showing your experiences, so it's and also helping others benefit from your experiences, and you bringing the change and being the change you yourself that you want to see and you want to bring. So it's important for politics to be more accessible for people that cannot access politics, cannot get involved. And one of the ways of us being able to make politics more accessible is by bringing politics to the people, as I said before, to getting the working class more involved. So those workers who can't get involved in politics should be joining their trade unions, and the trade unions should be also looking at workers who aren't being accessed and people who aren't being represented, and also promoting them and getting them involved in politics, because obviously politics can happen everywhere. Everything is politics, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the school, whether it's in the football field. It all seems to be political right now. So I think yes, those in and low paid jobs need politics more than any others.
I think I'm seeing, like, we're sort of cycling background. Earlier on, you mentioned about like the time to get involved in politics and things. Do you think like working class people also struggle for time because they're working these long hours, they're absolutely tired, and the last thing they want to do with their evening is get themselves to a political meeting when they could just, like, I don't know, sit down, have something nice to eat, and watch something on the telly and switch off?
Definitely, as I said before, it's the demands of work, the demands of social pressures, which don't simply allow people to give the time to get engaged in politics.
So like, as I said like earlier on, so you've got time that's an issue for people, and you've got like the fact that people are working too hard and they're being underrepresented. Is this kind of exacerbating the problem? So we're getting the wrong representatives in Parliament, for example. They aren't fighting for those things. Is this an issue, and how would we go about trying to solve that?
So it is an issue. We keep on talking about the need of more working class representation, and it's true. So we really, really need to make actually are representative of us. Very few. You cannot represent the working class if you don't know what the working class are going through, and so it's important that people uh, uh, from the working class are actually represented properly, and those people that represent the working class have to be from their communities, and we as a party have to facilitate their development. We can't hinder their progress, or we can't leave up these barriers to their inclusion, such as what I've said before. We need to learn more fully what the obstacles are that exist, and we're going to resolve to remove them so we can grow a more inclusive, democratic, and participative movements. Uh, and again, another misconception that we've got to get rid of is that the working class is only white. The working class is not only white. The working class involves people of different heritages and communities. The working class is black, it's Chinese, it's Bangladeshi, it's lesbian, it's gay, it's trans, it's every part of our society. And we as a movement must endeavour to lift up the whole of the working class in its diversity, because that's something we fail to do. Uh, right now, if you see, there's a lot of criticism about the party referring to the Union Jack, because what people say is, and this is on social media, I've read people saying, oh, the Labour Party's, every time there's a message from the leader or the deputy leader, there's a Union Jack in the background. The Tories have 2 Union Jacks in the background. But the reason the red wall, the party believes, has been let down is because there's not enough true working class representation, or the working class in the red wall areas believe that Labour doesn't represent them anymore. So what they're going to do is, by using the Union Jack or using a figure or a flag, they feel that they're going to relate to the working class more. That's not true. To relate to the working class more, you've got to learn fully what obstacles exist for them, and you've got to remove them, and you've got to make them more inclusive. You've got to involve them in terms of participation, and you've got to teach them, not teach them, sorry, you've got to involve them in democracy as well.
Like, if if that was a speech you were making, I'd have been giving you a standing ovation there, because you know, I fully agree with everything you said there about the working class, and I do think that people don't realise how much different communities have in common amongst those people who are doing those difficult jobs, the key workers, and very often these are the people who are the lowest paid, as you mentioned. Um, again, I agree with you, because I'm in a red wall seat as well in Sedgefield. We lost our Labour MP. We've ended up with a Tory, and one of the things that we think
So if
locally.
so Paul, you're in a red wall area. So if you're in a red
Mm,
wall area, are you more likely to vote for Labour because Labour are plugging the Union Jack more, or are you going to vote for Labour if they make opportunities more accessible for you? If they remove all the barriers that are making you making your jobs and your pay uh, lesser than they are right now, what will they do? Or will they what which one of those 2 things will they make you vote Labour for?
the people who would respond to a Union Jack probably are never going to vote Labour around here. That's what I would say. I think it would be it's a wasted strategy as far as I'm concerned. But I would also say that you know, those opportunities are very, very necessary. But the important thing about those opportunities, providing them, is listen to the opportunities that people want. That's one of the things that we've really got wrong. We haven't listened to people. We keep on telling people what they want, rather than speaking to people and saying, what do you want? And I think that's a really important part that we need to do as a Labour Party over the next few years. Certainly locally around here, it's about listening, I think. So yeah, it's the
So,
first time I've ever been asked a question on this. So thank you very
no,
much.
no, no. The reason I ask you is because the party doesn't challenge, and the party doesn't challenge people's conceptions on certain things. So, for example, the Union Jack is being used as a common thread between ordinary people and those people who said that they have uh, lost trust in Labour. However, the reason people will, if you ask them and you delve beneath the skin, people will feel that the Labour Party doesn't represent them anymore because the Labour Party doesn't understand what's happening in terms of how the community in those areas is changing. So what the Labour Party in itself should be doing is that those communities that are changing are representative of the UK that we live in today as well. And that's what's important. The UK, as I said before, is not just it's not based around people of just one culture anymore. It is a multicultural society right now, but all of those people represent the working class and they represent society, and that's something that Labour need to be proudly exhibiting, and not just thinking or being scared to answer these questions, because Immigration in red wall areas is quite a concern. But the answer to immigration isn't stopping immigration or more immigration. It's understanding is that the immigration that's happened is all beneficial right now to that community that you live in. For example, key workers, people working in hospitals, people working in uh, in, uh, in supermarkets. They have to go to work in a lockdown and times out of hours when buses aren't working, when trains aren't working. Who's taking them to work? Taxi drivers. More often than not, if you did a race audit on taxi drivers would not be white, there would be black or brown people. So those people are also serving the community in one way or another as well. So this is something that I think the party itself has to address head on, and also relate to the communities that this is what's going on, rather than instead of not explaining this, instead of not celebrating this, just sticking up a flag every now and again, because that all it does is just cover over it. We need to understand and we need to communicate to our communities better that this is the community that it is now, and this is the community that we live for. And your next door neighbor and Ali in the corner shop, they're all part of your community, because you have everything in common with them, compared to somebody who's taking your job away, or somebody who's in terms of because of they can't develop in your community, because the bosses aren't paying you the right wages. Those are the real barriers that we face.
I often think it's a distraction tactic as well to say, well, all these problems in the country. It's actually, it's really easy to say, isn't it? It's immigration that's causing the problem, but it clearly is not the problem. It's the system in which we live, where we haven't, like, I always say it's socialism for the rich and capitalism for everyone else. When you're seeing like these massive contracts handed out to these Circle and what have you, and for very little value. And they're the problems that we all have, rather than immigration. But as I say, back to listening, in the red wall seats like that we have, a lot of it's Brexit. A lot of the problem was Brexit, and people around here voted to leave the EU, and they felt that the Labour Party just said, well, actually, you were wrong. Your vote to leave the EU was wrong. And I think we've been doing that for a little while. Certainly coming across as being doing that and saying, actually, no, you're wrong, to the voters all the time. And they just got a little bit tired of it. You know?
Yeah. What happens in the red wall areas is that those areas lost trust in the party, and we've seen this. I live in a red wall area myself, and neighbouring constituencies, which have always held a Labour Party member of Parliament, have decided that they won't anymore. And if you look into the party's failings, it's because of the party's lack of transparency and the lack of it's their lack of failing to understand why these communities have gone. The reason that the communities have gone is because they don't believe that the Labour Party is recognising what's going on. If you go into those seats that we've lost, if you look at how often that Labour Party has campaigned there, or how often those local seats have been targeted by the party in terms of delivering what we've promised locally, in terms of we've taken certain sections of that community for granted for so many years, and that's what the answer is that people will say. It won't be because of it won't be because that they believe Jeremy that the party is turning a different economic model in. It's because they believe that the party has let them down in the past, and that's where we've got to build trust with them.
Hey. So that brings me neatly on to like what I'm going to ask you finally, which is, what is your positive vision for the future? How can we, create a socialist society, and how can we convince people that that's going to be a good thing for people to have, that's going to be beneficial for everyone in all communities?
Uh, okay, so what we really need is we need a Labour government. We need a Labour government that promotes uh, socialist values, socialist principles. We need a Labour government that's going to fight inequality, and we need a Labour government that's going to stick up for ordinary people. That is the main thing now, to stick up for ordinary people. As I said at the very beginning, uh, we need to meet the very fundamentals and necessary uh, the necessary things that people need to get on with their life. So people, like I said, they need food, they need clothes, they need to be healthy, they need to live in a house with a roof over their head, and they need work, education, and to be treated as humanely as possible. And that's what's fundamentally the current government are failing to deliver. And to do that, the current system will not work. The current system, where you don't offer anything different to what the current government are offering. So we need to offer something radically different. So we need to embrace things like the Green New Deal. Well, Green New Deal will not just provide good jobs, it will also uh, benefits in terms of providing a better culture and better future for our children as well. In terms of the environment, we need to also embrace radical thinking in terms of the way we work, the way we have to commit ourselves to work. Some people work 5 days, 6 days a week, very little family time. We need to be able to offer alternatives where people are not just uh, working to live or living to, they're not just living to work, they're actually working because it's part of their lives in terms of having to provide for their family as well. And we also need, I think, a more caring society. And that's what, unfortunately, uh, we haven't been able to be having them under an austerity led conservative government. And unless the Labour Party also show that they are also going to be a caring party, it's going to be very difficult for us to actually win round those people who feel that they've been left behind.
So, do you think it's possible for the Labour Party to win without offering something really positive?
The Labour Party cannot win by out Torying the Tories. The Labour Party will only win by offering a radical alternative. And in my opinion, the radical alternative has to be not tailing back on 2017, 2019 manifestos, but actually improving on them and going beyond them and offering something that is going to change people's lives for a long time.
I'm going to be a little bit specific here. So, Kier Starmer made 10 pledges. Did you agree with those 10 pledges? Like in principle, is there anything to disagree with in those 10 pledges as a socialist?
I don't think in principle there's any of those 10 pledges I disagree with. I think every single one of them uh, were good pledges and they're good socialist promises as well. I wouldn't agree with a single one of them. I wouldn't disagree with a single one of them. I think they were good 10, were a good bunch of pledges.
Would you agree that that a pledge is something that should be kept to?
100%. A pledge is a promise. It's a contract between between the person who makes the pledge and the people they're making it to.
And do you think any of them have been like? Are there any hints that he is going to renege on any of them so far?
Uh, to answer your question more diplomatically, I don't think he has delivered any of his pledges yet.
Yeah, it would be impossible for him to deliver his pledges so far, but like with
Well,
regards to policy platform, is there any deviation from those pledges, do you think?
yeah. Well, what I meant was not delivering the pledges. I mean,
Ah,
keeping to those pledges. I don't think he has kept to any of those pledges yet. And uh, day after day, you will find that those pledges are the absolute opposite is happening.
what do you think on the idea of like with regards to, I think it's pledge number 7 is on trade unionism and supporting trade unions. Um, did Keir Starmer support the trade unions when the NEU, the NASUWT, the GMB, and Unite and Unison called for schools to be shut, not because they didn't want their workers to work, but because it was becoming increasingly clear that schools were unsafe?
I think the Labour Party made a huge mistake on that because they ended up calling for schools to close. Uh, and they ended up calling for schools to close about an hour and a half before the Tories actually closed them. Whereas the trade unions, all of them were calling for schools to close much earlier, and they were calling for schools to close to make it safer as well, which was important. Yeah, 100%. I think the Labour Party made a huge mistake, and activists were calling for it. Trade unionists were calling for it. A lot of people in the parliamentary party were also calling for it. The Socialist Campaign Group were calling for it as well. We Momentum were calling for it. Organisations on the left were calling for it. I think it was an open goal.
And I think it was morally right as well, given the situation the country's in. So I suppose the advice then, would you? I'll allow you to, but would your advice be for Kier Starmer to keep to those pledges? If his pledges are good and we agree with them as socialist principles, would the advice be to stick to your principles?
It will be to stick to your principles, and it's also I think his pledges are pretty basic moral and decent stances as well. And it's really difficult that for the party to make pledges and then not adhere to those pledges, because it's also shows that your promises, if you don't fulfill your promises or even show to fulfill your promises, that you can be trusted once you're in government, and people will pick up on that as well, that he has to deliver his pledges, because if he doesn't deliver his pledges as the leader of the opposition when he's in actual government and power, people will expect them to be delivered, and it doesn't set a good example in terms of being able to trust him as well. So I'm sure Keir Starmer understands that. It's up to him now to make sure that he delivers on them.
Absolutely outstanding. Well, Mish, you've been absolutely incredible. I'm really grateful for you coming on. Is there anything you'd like to finish on?
No, thank you, Socialist Think Tank, for everything that you're doing. I think it's important that we have these discussions, and it's important that we bring to communities the importance of socialism and what it is, because obviously socialism is something that people are generally afraid of unless we talk about it and explain to people that socialism is exactly what we've been talking about. It's about delivering things that people need, rather than based on a system where it's all about giving people economic value. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to talking to you soon again.
Keep the red flag flying, yeah.